Okay. So, a normal pregnancy may cause physiologic stress. So, a normal endocrine physiology is the foundation. A normal endocrine physiology is the foundation of pregnancy. So, here we will discuss two cases: diabetes in pregnancy and thyroid disease in pregnancy. High risk but less common disorders and endocrine emergencies and synthesis and clinical takeaways. That is an endocrine state. So, most of the hormones during pregnancy may increase and may alter. So, most of the common involved hormones during this state is your estrogen, progesterone, your relaxin, your human gonadotropin, placental growth hormone, human placental lactogen, and Kiss15. So each hormone has different function during pregnancy. Yan. Kita natin. Okay. Pregnancy is your human chorionic gonadotropin or your HCG. So the main source of this CG Okay. So the main source of your HCG is from the syncytiotropoblast. It maintains the corpus luteum in early pregnancy. It stimulates progesterone production. It's also stimulate the fetal testis in male fetus. And it weakly stimulates thyroid receptor. Thus, during this early part of pregnancy, the TSH or thyroid stimulating hormone is usually low. So, if you will encounter gestational trophoblastic disease, usually the beta HCG is very high on this kind of patient. Also, very elevated beta HCG is associated with hyperemesis gravidarum. Okay? And also gestational transient thyrotoxicosis if you have elevated HCG. It usually peaks by 8 to 10 weeks age of gestation. So next of the important endocrine hormone in pregnancy is your progesterone. So progesterone is the main source of progesterone during the early state of pregnancy is the corpus luteum. Later on, the corpus luteum will die and then placenta will develop. And this will be the main source of progesterone. So what is the function? It maintains endometrium for implantation. It prevents uterine contraction. It also promotes immune tolerance of fetus and stimulate breast development. During pregnancy, it may cause early pregnancy loss. That is why we usually give progesterone tablet or progesterone suppository during the early phase of pregnancy for those who have threatened abortion. So next of the hormone is the estrogen. So what is the predominant type? We have three types of estrogen. The estriol, the estrone, and the ano yung isang E? What is the other estrogen? That is your estradiol. So your estriol estrogen is the predominant type of estrogen in pregnant women. While your estradiol, it is predominant on reproductive age women. And the estrone is the one that's usually elevated or predominant on menopausal women. Okay, so what's the function of your estrogen? So your estrogen from the placenta converts from the placenta, the fetal adrenal androgen was converted into estrogen. So your estrogen helps stimulate uterine growth. It increases uterine blood flow. It promotes breast ductal development and prepares uterus for labor. So next of the hormone is the human placental lactogen or HPL. It is also called human chorionic somatomamotropin. So it functions. This HPL or human placental lactogen is important in the balancing of insulin in pregnant women because it may cause maternal insulin resistance. It also increases lipolysis. It ensures glucose availability for the growing fetus. So any abnormalities in or imbalance in this HPL may contribute to the development of gestational diabetes in pregnancy. So next of the hormone is the placental corticotropin releasing hormone or CRH. So it stimulates fetal adrenal cortisol production. It also plays a role in timing of labor. So the level of it rise dramatically in late pregnancy and may induce labor. Okay. So during pregnancy, there will be increased binding proteins and increased total hormone levels. So the hormone levels are your estrogen, progesterone, the HCG, your HPL, and the relaxin. So HCG has effects on the thyroid gland. And progressive insulin resistance during second and third trimester because of the increased production of your human placental lactogen. There will be also increased cortisol and aldosterone activity. Yeah. So pregnancy causes a marked rise in hormone-binding proteins, mainly due to high estrogen levels. Estrogen may stimulate the liver to produce more of these proteins. So your thyroid hormones binded to the thyroid-binding globulin, your cortisol, to the corticosteroid-binding globulin, and sex hormone to sex hormone-binding globulin. So never diagnose endocrine disease in pregnancy without first asking, could this be normal physiology only? Okay. So this rule prevents over and under treatment. So we have a case. A 29-year-old gravida 2 para 1 in 28 weeks gestation, complaining of fatigue and polyuria, abnormal glucose screening. So what diagnoses are possible at this point? So anyone?
Gestational diabetes.
Okay, gestational diabetes, or you may call it collectively say it because there are also diabetes type 2, diabetes in pregnancy. Okay? So, this is the pathophysiology of diabetes in pregnancy. So, as placental hormones produce large amount of what? What hormones that? That I already discussed related to insulin resistant. The
HPL po, Doc.
HPL, very good. So as your placental hormone increasingly producing HPL or human placenta lactogen, it increases the insulin resistance of your patient or your pregnant women. Thus, this may cause pancreatic beta cell compensation required, and if this failed, it will result to hyperglycemia. Okay. Yan. So, during early pregnancy, there will be increased insulin insensitivity. Thus, storage phase will progress. During mid-pregnancy, placental hormones also will still increase. Insulin resistance begins. Late in pregnancy, hormones peak and the maximum insulin resistance is achieved. So after achieving the maximum insulin resistance, there will be decreased maternal hyperglycemia, fetal hyperglycemia that will soon result to hyperinsulinemia, and this hyperglycemia can lead to macrosomia and neonatal hypoglycemia. Okay. So early in pregnancy, maternal body is building energy reserve and hypoglycemia may also occur. During mid-pregnancy, start of diabetogenic state, and we usually do screening of GDM done at 24 to 28 weeks of gestation. But in our clinics and in the Philippines, we usually do the screening on the first visit of the patient in our clinic, and we usually request fasting blood glucose. If the fasting blood glucose is normal, then we again check it by 24 to 28 weeks by the use of the 75 grams OGTT. Okay? So during late pregnancy, this is the critical point. Insulin resistance is the highest here, and GDM becomes clinically apparent, and fetal complications are most pronounced. So the more the sugar is uncontrolled during the late pregnancy, the more it is to have fetal complication. Okay? So this is how we diagnose overt diabetes during pregnancy. So if your hemoglobin A1C is greater than 6.5%, or the fasting blood glucose is greater than or equal to 126 milligram per DL. So that will be DM or overt DM in pregnancy. Okay? So gestational diabetes is diagnosed if your blood sugar is elevated to greater than or equal to 92 to 126. Okay. So what are the maternal and fetal neonatal consequences of this diabetes in pregnancy? So in mother's side, she may develop preeclampsia, there will be a possibility of operative delivery and long-term metabolic disease. On the fetal side, maternal hyperglycemia may cause fetal hyperinsulinemia. So this fetal hyperinsulinemia will lead to macrosomia. If your baby is macrosomia, there's a high chance that this baby, when you deliver it vaginally, there will be shoulder dystocia. And soon, it will develop neonatal hyperglycemia that can lead to fetal death. So how do we manage? We usually do glycemic targets to prevent complication. Nutrition and monitoring is the first. Medication if targets unmet, and delivery planning is individualized. So not all diabetic women should be delivered via cesarean. So postpartum implication, glucose tolerance is usually normalizes 6 weeks post-delivery. There's an increase or high recurrence risk to develop it after pregnancy, and long-term prevention is an opportunity. So second case, 10-week pregnant with complaint of palpitations, tremor, weight loss, and heat intolerance. What makes thyroid disease difficult to diagnose in pregnancy? So what is this case? May palpitations, tremors, and weight loss. What is this case?
Hyperthyroidism.
Yeah, hyperthyroidism in pregnancy. So what makes thyroid disease difficult to diagnose in pregnancy?
Because TSH increase.
Because of? Your answer is correct. Because of?
TSH.
I cannot understand you, doctor. I think it's your connection. I cannot properly hear you. Because of what?
Because of physiologic changes happening during pregnancy can mimic
Oo, what is that? What is that hormone?
TSH po.
TSH is also released by placenta, so it might
What hormone is that responsible that
confuse
will
the
affect your thyroid
real underlying.
hormone? Huh?
HCG.
The HCG. Okay, it's the reason. Is very low. Okay, so that's the reason why it's very difficult to diagnose thyroid disease in pregnancy. Okay, so normally the HCG can cause suppression of your thyroid stimulation hormone during early pregnancy. As I said earlier, this causes increased thyroid binding globulin, and symptoms can overlap with pregnancy. Kasi di ba, the most symptoms of pregnancy is vomiting. Di ba? That's normal in normal pregnancy. But in excessive and also in elevated beta HCG, it may cause also hyperemesis gravidarum. Okay? So the symptoms overlap. That's why it's really difficult to diagnose. So these are the differential diagnoses of thyrotoxicosis. So Graves' disease, gestational transient thyrotoxicosis, and thyroiditis. So first is the Graves' disease. Graves' disease is an autoimmune hyperthyroidism caused by thyroid-stimulating immunoglobulins that activate the TSH receptor. it causes excess T3 and T4 production. So as the antibodies increases, it stimulates the TSH receptor, producing increased thyroid hormone, thus causing the pregnant women to have a hypermetabolic state. So these antibodies can cross the placenta and can also affect the fetus. So what are the symptoms? So your patient may have tachycardia, heat intolerance, weight loss, despite appetite. There will be tremors and anxiety. So the classic sign, when you examine your patient, you will note that a diffuse type of goiter, exophthalmos may be present, and there may be a thyroid fluid. So when you request a laboratory findings are the following: usually low TSH with elevated free T4 or T3, and a positive TSH receptor antibodies or TRAB. So this is the finding. Okay. So during pregnancy, it may worsen in first trimester due to HCG stimulation. It often improves in second and third trimester and may flare for postpartum. So, maternal side, this Graves' disease may cause preeclampsia, heart failure, and thyroid storm and preterm labor. On the fetal side, due to the transplacental antibodies that will cross the placenta to reach the fetus, it may cause fetal hyperthyroidism, fetal tachycardia, fetal goiter, growth restriction, hydrospitalis, and neonatal thyrotoxicosis. Ay, naulit lang. Okay. So, how do we manage? So, during the first trimester, the endocrinologist may prescribe PTU or propylthiouracil, and during the second and third trimester, it will be shifted to metimazole. So the goal of management is to maintain the free T4 at upper normal range. And the monitoring is usually from 4 to 6 weeks, and assess the well-being through series of your ultrasound. So next of the thyrotoxicosis is the gestational thyroid toxicosis. It is a transient non-autoimmune hyperthyroid state in early pregnancy caused by high levels of HCG stimulating TSH receptors. So high HCG levels during the first trimester will weaken the stimulation of the TSH receptor, thus increasing thyroid hormone and giving a feedback suppression in the production of your TSH. So, clinical features, your patient may present with nausea and vomiting, palpitation, and mild tachycardia. But this is usually strongly associated with patient with hyperemesis gravidarum. Okay? It occurs in first trimester. It peaks at 8 to 10 weeks and resolves spontaneously by 14 to 20 weeks. So, when you requested for laboratory, these are the usual laboratory findings that you may notice. There will be a decrease of TSH, mild increase in free T4, and negative TSH receptor antibodies. On physical exam, no goiter appreciated, no ophthalmopathy. These findings will help you distinguish it from Graves' disease. Okay? So, what are the key differentiation? So, usually, your gestational thyrotoxicosis is HCG mediated, while your Graves' disease is autoimmune. Timing, gestational thyrotoxicosis, first trimester only, spontaneously resolved by 14 to 20 weeks. Your Graves' disease anytime, any trimester of pregnancy. So TRAB, is negative in GT but positive in the Graves' disease. Goiter is absent, same with eye signs in gestational thyrotoxicosis, but both were present in Graves' disease. So gestational thyrotoxicosis is self-limited, but Graves' disease can be persistent and even can occur postpartum. So management, usually no anti-thyroid drugs are needed. Supportive care through hydration, antiemetics, and beta blockers. So next is thyroiditis. This refers to inflammation of the thyroid gland, usually leading to a transient release of preformed thyroid hormones, followed by possible hypothyroidism. So, when your thyroid gland is inflamed, it will cause destruction of thyroid follicles. So, this destruction of thyroid follicles will result into the release of stored T3 and T4. Asan sila? Did I stop? What slide did you,
From
Wait.
thyroiditis pathophysiology daw.
this one, the thyroiditis pathophysiology?
Yes po daw.
I thought I was lost eh. That's why I stopped. Okay. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so the destruction of the thyroid follicles will cause the release of the stored T3 and T4 and transient hyperthyroid phase. This will cause the transient hyperthyroid phase and depletion of hormone store. So this depletion will soon lead to hypothyroid phase and most of the cases, recovery. So postpartum thyroiditis, this is important because it occurs within 12 months after delivery. Phase 1, usually 1 to 4 months postpartum, there will be a hyperthyroid phase. Then phase 2, 4 to 8 months postpartum, hypothyroid phase. Then, after 8 months, this will return to normal. So, during the hyperthyroid phase, your patient may experience palpitations, anxiety, fatigue, mild symptoms often overlooked. During the hypothyroid phase, the next 4 to 8 months, there will be fatigue, weight gain, depressions, and cold intolerance. So when you request for the laboratory during the hyperthyroid, there will be decreased TSH and elevated pre-T4. During the hypothyroid, there will be increased TSH and elevated TSH and decreased pre-T4. So other findings then can be a positive anti-TPO and low radioactive iodine uptake if tested. Okay? So different from Graves' disease, thyroiditis, the mechanism is through hormone leakage. Your grave disease is hormone overproduction. Radioiodine uptake may be low in thyroiditis but high in Graves' disease. PRAB is negative in thyroiditis but positive in Graves' disease. Eye signs is usually absent also in thyroiditis but present in Graves' disease. So how do we manage? During the hyperthyroid phase, patient is given beta blockers in the form of either propranolol. During the hypothyroid phase, levothyroxine if the patient is symptomatic. And prognosis, most return to euthyroid state and 20 to 30% risk of permanent hypothyroidism. So what are the other endocrine disorders? So there can be calcium and parathyroid disorders. Hyperparathyroidism may cause stones and pancreatitis in pregnancy. Hypocalcemia may cause neuromuscular irritability. The fetal calcium regulation depends on the mother. So pituitary disorders and diabetes insipidus. Pituitary enlargement is usually normal during pregnancy. Visual changes is a red flag. And polyuria is considered diabetes insipidus. So what are the endocrine emergencies? First is the adrenal crisis, hypotension, vomiting, abdominal pain, and electrolyte abnormalities. So these are the clinical features of adrenal crisis. So it's better to treat first the symptoms before diagnosed and diagnose later. So we also have this pheochromocytoma in pregnancy, wherein there's an episodic headache, palpitation, sweating, and severe or labile hypertension that may mimic preeclampsia. So why can misdiagnosis be catastrophic? Why? But kaya
It could harm the mom and the baby.
Yes. And also,
Could lead to complications,
like what?
death.
Yes, it can lead to death of both mother and baby. So, but this pheochromocytoma is very rare occurrence in pregnant women. So, the most not good complication of this is fetal and maternal death. Okay, so thyroid storm is another endocrine emergency. So the clinical feature is hypothermia, severe tachycardia, CNS, and GI symptoms. This is also rare but still life-threatening. So when you have an endocrine disorders during pregnancy, this is how you will assess it. So first, identify normal pregnancy physiology. After you rule out that this is not a normal pregnancy physiology, define what is causing it. So define the pathology. Third, assess maternal risk and anticipate possible fetal effects. And once you diagnose it, once you have already your consideration, act early and appropriately. So, ito. Early pregnancy hyperglycemia suggests what?
Diabetes.
Early
Diabetes.
Early pregnancy hyperglycemia.
Type
May
2
suggest-
diabetes mellitus in pregnancy.
Type 2 or can be overt diabetes. Okay? So most common cause of early pregnancy, thyrotoxicosis.
HCG.
Hmm? Yeah.
Hyperthyroidism.
Disease, gestation, thyroiditis. Ano doon? Most common cause. So that's your gestational thyrotoxicosis. Diba? Yun nagkakaroon. The one that develop hyperemesis gravidarum and usually resolve after 14 to 28 weeks. Okay? So how does fetal macrosomia develop?
Maternal hyperglycemia that will lead to
Then,
hyperinsulinemia.
Okay? So what is your red flag for pheochromocytoma?
Vision loss.
Paroxysmal hypertension.
Okay. First priority in adrenal crisis.
IV hydrocortisone.
No. Treat the symptoms first, diagnose later. Okay, ganon, ha? Okay? So, in summary, pregnancy can alter endocrine norms. Mechanism is based on listening to prevent errors. Stabilize the mother to protect the fetus. Endocrine disease in pregnancy is high yield and also high in impact. Okay, so that ends our first lecture. So, second part. Philippine Days. So, bioethics in the practice of obstetrics and gynecology. So, obstetric and gynecology is one of the most ethical, complex fields in medicine because OB-GYN have two patients, the mother and the fetus, while also navigating legal restrictions, cultural norms, religious beliefs, and patient autonomy. In our country, the Philippines, ethical decision-making in OB-GYN is particularly challenging because our country has strong religious and cultural influences. Abortion is still illegal. There are specific reproductive health laws, and maternal care often occurs in resource-limited settings. Okay. Thus, Filipino physician must balance medical judgment, ethical principles, legal obligation, and patient's right. So what are the core principles of bioethics? First is autonomy. So autonomy is respecting the patient's right to make informed decision regarding her body and health. So, for example, you have a patient that chooses cesarean delivery, that have to choose between cesarean delivery and vaginal delivery, and the woman declines contraception due to religious beliefs. Okay. So next, beneficence is acting in the best interest of the patient. So this means that you have to, for example, providing emergency cesarean section to prevent fetal distress. Okay? So acting in the best interest of the patient. Non-maleficence means first, do no harm. It means avoiding unnecessary procedures that may increase maternal risk. And the last is justice, which is a fair distribution of health care resources and equitable treatment. For example, providing equal obstetric care regardless of socio-economic status. So these principles guide clinical decision-making when ethical dilemmas arises. So, in the dual patient concept, in obstetric, clinicians are often have two patients simultaneously. The pregnant woman, who is the primary patient, and the fetus, which is the developing patient. However, ethically and legally, the pregnant woman remains the primary decision maker because she is the individual capable of autonomous decision making and informed consent. So, if we experience maternal and fetal conflict, for example, if your patient refused for cesarean section despite fetal distress, the pregnant patient has the right to make decision about her body in maternal autonomy, even if those decisions may pose risk to the fetus. Okay? Respect for autonomy means physician must respect informed decision even when the patient disagree with them. Okay? So maternal rights versus fetal interest. Okay. But when we apply the core value of beneficence, this will apply toward the fetus. So, physician, the doctor, the OB-GYN has also a professional obligation to promote fetal well-being. This means that she or he should monitor the fetal health, recommending treatments that improve neonatal outcomes and preventing avoidable fetal harm. So that is to do cesarean section to the woman. But, however, fetal beneficence cannot override maternal autonomy. Thus, a fetus does not have independent legal decision-making authority while in utero. So whatever the mother decide for her body is the one that we will follow. So another situation, if you have a patient who is a Jehovah's Witness who refuse of blood transfusion. Okay? So still on patient autonomy, if she refuse, we have to respect the decision. But given that we can offer the patient some alternative some alternative for blood products, okay, such as your IV hydration, your Voluben, your iron sucrose. Okay. And it's really important also to elaborate to your patient that her refusal of having blood transfusion can lead to many complications and even maternal death. So it's very important that if the patient refuses, we have to document and we have to write his or her refusal. Okay? Yan. If she refuses, respect the patient religious autonomy. Discuss alternative blood management strategies. Okay. So how do we balance maternal rights and fetal interest? So maternal rights includes bodily autonomy, informed consent, religious freedom, and right to refuse treatment. These rights are strongly protected in medical ethics and in laws. While the fetal interest, physicians also recognize the moral importance of preventing fetal harm, promoting fetal survival, and ensuring healthy neonatal outcome. However, fetal interest must generally be pursued through maternal consent, not through coercion. Okay? So we will not impose the management to the mother, even though it's best for the baby. Okay? Whatever the mother requested, that should be the one to follow. Okay. So, when conflict arises, ethical management involves. So, first, there should be a respectful communication. So, always elaborate the possible maternal risk, the fetal risk, and the possible treatment alternatives. Next, it should be always a shared decision making, not only one. So encourage collaborative decision rather than possession authority. So we cannot impose to the patient what we want to do. Next, in complex cases, or if the patient cannot decide, or even the patient cannot decide, we can do ethics consultation. So our hospital have ethics committee, and we can discuss this case through different doctors for help us to decide on how to manage the patient. So avoid coercion. So what is coercion? What do you mean by coercion? Coercion is a practice of persuading someone to do something by using force or threats. So, okay, so do not threat or force your patient to follow what do you want to do with her. Okay? Always respect for patient dignity. So, in the Philippines, the Philippine legal framework in reproductive ethics include first, the Philippines Constitution in 1987. In the 1987 Philippine Constitution, it provides the foundation of reproductive ethics and maternal care in the country. So in Article 2, Section 12, it states that the state recognizes the sanctity of family life and shall protect the life of the mother and the life of the unborn from conception. So, what did it imply to the OB-GYN practice? It means that the fetus is given constitutional recognition. It also implies policies emphasize paternal fetal protection, and this principle influences laws on abortion and reproductive health. So, this is the right to health. So, the Constitution also mandates that the state must protect and promote the right to health to all the people. So it ensures access to maternal health services. It provides safe pregnancy and delivery care and promote reproductive health education. So the Philippines has one of the most restrictive abortion law in the world, and abortion is still criminalized under the revised penal code. So there's no exception even if the case is a rape, incest, or if the baby has fetal anomalies. Physicians performing abortion may face imprisonment. So based on the Article 256 to 259, it criminalized the induced abortion, self-induced abortion, and assisting in abortion. So penalties may apply to the person performing the abortion, the pregnant women, and those assisting the procedure. So, physician must understand that ethically, she should provide safe, life-saving treatment for complication of unsafe abortion. She should also maintain patient confidentiality and avoid judgment or discrimination. So post-abortion care remains legal and ethically required. So even though that your patient or case is an induced abortion, we should still treat the patient accordingly. So about the Parenthood and the Public Health Act, RA 10354. It is enacted in 2012, and this law guarantees access to family planning services, contraceptive, reproductive health education, and maternal care services. This also mandates non-judgmental treatment of women with post-abortion complication. And this law significantly shaped ethical reproductive healthcare delivery in the Philippines. So, under this law, maternal health services, there should be healthcare institution must provide prenatal care, skilled birth attendance, postpartum care, and emergency obstetric care. So, this aims to reduce maternal mortality, which remains a public health concern. Okay, so this is under the SGD. Are you familiar with the SGD? Are you familiar with the SDG pala, SDG? Yung
Yes po,
Sustainable
Doc.
Development Goal. So, the Sustainable Development Goals have 7 interconnected global goals, and reduced maternal mortality is under SDG number 3, yung good health and well-being. Okay. But when it was first published in around 2009, is previously called Millennial Development Goal. It is the reduced maternal mortality rate is under 7 because they only have number 5, 3 ba o 5? They only have 7 MDG or Millennial Developmental Goal during that time. But now we already have 17. Still, the maternal mortality is one of the big health concern globally. So, there's an informed choice. Patient must receive complete, accurate, and unbiased information about reproductive health options. It's also based on patient autonomy and informed consent. So there will be a consensus objection. Healthcare provider may refuse to provide certain reproductive services if they conflict with personal beliefs. However, provider must refer patient to another provider, and emergency care cannot be refused. Okay, an example of this are those Catholic doctors, some of the Catholic doctors that do not perform bilateral tubal ligation or do not even give hormonal contraception. So they're responsible for referring their patient to those doctors that can provide those services if they don't perform or they don't advise those reproductive health. Okay? So, if we face an ethical decision, first is to identify the ethical problem. So you should ask, is there a conflict between medical recommendation and patient wishes? Or if there's a maternal fetal conflict, or if there's a legal restriction involved. If there's no ethical conflict, proceed with standard clinical care. But if there's an ethical conflict, continue to step 2. So step 2 is to assess clinical facts. So, what are the options in the management of your patient? For example, is it emergency cesarean section, continued monitoring, or operative vaginal delivery? So ethical decision must always be grounded in accurate medical facts. Okay? So next, determine patient capacity. Does the patient have decision-making capacity? So does she understand the information? Does the patient appreciate consequences? Is the reason about options? If the patient can communicate with her choice. So if the patient is competent, her decision prevails. If patient lacks capacity, go to surrogate decision maker. Okay? Step 4, apply the 4 bioethical principles once you have already your decision. So does the patient understand that she voluntarily decide? Okay? Beneficent, what actions best benefits the patient? So next, check the Philippine legal consideration. Okay? Always check this Philippine Constitution 1987, the Revised Penal Code, and the RA 10354. Okay. If there no law will violate, proceed to the decision. But if there's something that needs to violate, discuss with patient and the family. It should be a shared decision making. So discuss the diagnosis, the risks and benefits, the possible alternative options, and the consequences of refusal. Okay. So seek further consultation if needed. Consult a senior resident, the attending physician, the hospital ethics, or the legal department. So this will protect the patient welfare and also physician accountability. So this is the most important step, document everything. So documentation is crucial in ethical dilemmas. You should record your clinical findings, the discussion with patient, this explain patient decisions, refusal, or treatment. Okay, so anything that is not written is not done. So that's why it's very important to document. So provide compassionate care. So always show professionalism, non-judgmental care, and respect for patient dignity even if your patient doesn't follow your decision. Okay, okay. So examples. You have a primigravida in labor that developed fetal distress. The doctor recommends emergency cesarean section. So what if the patient refuses? And what if the relative refuse the consent? So who has the final decision? The patient or the relative?
The patient.
The patient. Still the patient if she is competent. But if she's not competent, you can go to the nearest of kin. Okay? So, teenage pregnancy. So, Philippines has significant adolescent pregnancy rate and ethically, they still have confidentiality, parental involvement, and sexual health counseling. So you have a 16-year-old pregnant patient requesting for contraception after delivery, but ask the doctor not to tell her parents. So how will you act on this?
Probably follow legal guidelines regarding minors.
How?
Still ask for the patient's parents' consent.
When you have a 16-year-old patient, is still a minor, no? But we have to respect her confidentiality. So if she requests not to tell her patient, that we should respect that. But we have to counsel the patient. That is how we will encourage her to involve the parents by proper counseling. Okay? When we do the proper counseling, she might agree allowing her parents to get involved on her decision. Okay? So first, respect what she wishes. Then, start counseling your patient. And she might or may not still allow to involve her or his parents. Okay? Ito, a Jehovah's Witness patient with postpartum hemorrhage refuses blood transfusion. So how do you tackle it? How do you
Tell the patients all the risk
then?
and then let her decide on what she wants.
Okay. Okay. Tell the risk and also give alternatives. Okay? So first, you list down, these are the following consequences that might happen to you if you don't want to have blood transfusion. Okay? After that, so these are the options that you might consider if you don't want blood transfusion. But, okay, these are the options. So you give her the options. Okay? Then after that, on whatever she's agreed, if she agreed with the options, you have to document that. You also have to ask the patient that she had to document that she refused the primary or the first line of treatment, which is the blood transfusion. Okay? Always document that. Do not forget. Do not just be a verbal documentation. Okay. So you have a abortion that came to you with sepsis, uterine perforation, and hemorrhage. So still, the doctors need to provide life-saving treatment, avoid judgment, and maintain confidentiality. But induced abortion is reported in, we do bladder for cases like this. Okay? Because this is a criminal offense. Yan. So you have a Catholic patient refuses modern contraception. So what will you do?
Respect the decision.
And
Offer natural family planning options.
okay. So respect the decision and respect what you want and always offer natural family planning options kasi meron naman. Okay? So, in assisted reproductive technology, so there's some ethical question about the IVF embryo status, surrogacy, and embryo disposal. Okay, IVF embryo status. Here, if you have IVF, you have to rebirth that. Not you say. That baby should be implanted to you. Okay? Surrogacy is not yet legal in the Philippines, and embryo disposal is still not allowed in the Philippines. So if you have embryo already placed in the Philippines, you have to implant that in your uterus. Okay? Sterilization. So if you encounter patient for sterilization, especially women, in our country, we don't need to ask permission from the husband or on the common law husband because that is voluntary consent. If the patient already want to do sterilization, we will do the sterilization without the consent of the husband or the common law husband. Okay? So in summary, OB-GYN practices involves complex ethical dilemmas. Physician must balance autonomy, beneficence, and non-maleficence and justice. Philippine practice is influenced by constitutional protection of unborn life, strict abortion law, and reproductive health law. And ethical practice requires compassion, cultural sensitivity, and legal awareness. Okay, so any question? So, gising pa ba kayo? Are you still awake? Yes.